forgot my mic. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's ECM. I hope you're doing well today. It's Resistance Live for the 13th of February, 2024. Okay. I don't know. I'm tired today. We have a bunch of stuff to talk about. And the primary thing is that, as predicted, Trump did file something in front of the Supreme Court yesterday. So we'll get to that in a minute. In the interim, I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva territory. I am today wearing a black turtleneck sweater with kind of like a gray shawl thing over top. My hair is pulled back. I am a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I'm in my office in front of my big plant and my chair and my lamp and my bookcase and everything else. Hi, Scotland. Hi, Brentwood, California. Hello, Cincinnati, North Carolina. Hope you're doing well. Reminder to all of our friends in New York, today is the special election to fill George Santos' seat. Yes, I know there is an enormous snowstorm going on in northern Queens, but if you happen to live there, or on the northern reaches of Long Island in the New York 3rd, please do not forget to vote today. We need this seat. Tom Suozzi is running for that seat as a Democrat, and any pickup we can make would be great. All right. Let's talk about what happened at the Supreme Court. So yesterday, as required by the DC Circuit's ruling, Donald Trump filed a motion, what's essentially not a writ of certiorari, which is what we were expecting. We were expecting a straight appeal. What he did instead was he moved for a stay. And essentially what he's trying to do here is to get the Supreme Court to stop the 11th Circuit's ruling that everything is going to go back down to Judge Chutkan's courtroom and the trial will proceed as planned unless and until writ of certiorari is granted by the Supreme Court, which ordinarily you have 90 days to do. But you will all remember that the DC Circuit said we're only staying our ruling in this case until Monday, February 12th. And so essentially that boxed Donald Trump into doing one of two things, either filing a writ of certiorari before the Supreme Court or filing a motion to stay. Otherwise, we're back on the trial calendar in the District Court for the District of Columbia. So he filed to stay. Now, I will say this is not what I predicted was actually going to happen, because one of the things about filing for a stay in front of the Supreme Court is it takes 5 justices to grant it, not the 4 that it takes to grant a straight appeal. So why did Trump do this? Well, it's signaled in his brief. What he wants to be able to do first is file an appeal for an en banc ruling in front of the entire DC Circuit. Those of you who have been here for a long time know how this works. Ordinarily, when you appeal to a federal court of appeals, you get a random 3-judge panel that is assigned to hear your appeal. That is what happened here, and he lost. Then there is a second stage of review at the circuit court level that you're technically entitled to, but a lot of people don't bother with. And that's what's called an en banc appeal, which is when you appeal from the 3-judge panel to the entire panel of the circuit court of appeals, meaning all of the judges who are appointed to that circuit court of appeals get a chance to weigh in on the case. Again, here, the 3-judge panel of the DC Circuit boxed Trump in by saying, don't bother with an en banc appeal, because if you file en banc, we're just going to tell the trial court that they can proceed while your en banc appeal is pending. So essentially what Trump did was he went to the Supreme Court not to appeal, but to say, grant us a stay so that we can do an en banc appeal first and then a traditional writ of certiorari, which, by the way, is likely to delay the entire thing until after the 2024 election. That is not going to happen. I'm just going to tell you all this right now. All right. So here is what has happened. Well, let me back up for a second because I read the brief. And those of you who are following me on Threads know that I had a good chuckle yesterday about the nature of this brief, because not only does it start on what is perhaps the most farcical note that I have ever seen a Supreme Court brief start on. It literally starts with a quote from Yogi Berra. The first citation in the brief is not the Constitution or the standard for applying a stay in front of the Supreme Court or Marbury versus Madison, which is one of the fundamental cases on which the entire American judicial system turns and which is implicated in this case. No, their first citation was to the Yogi Berra quote museum on the internet. If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about Trump's legal team here, I don't even know what to tell you. But essentially, where we are at this moment in time is that an appeal has been, a motion for a stay essentially has been filed in the Supreme Court with a brief that literally is probably the weakest brief I've ever seen filed in front of the Supreme Court. And I'm not saying that lightly. They do not meet the standard for a stay to begin with, which is a fair likelihood of reversal on appeal. They do not have a basis on which to assert that irreparable harm will take place if the stay isn't granted, because of course the case can go to trial and then it can be appealed again if the end result of that is what Donald Trump doesn't like and he's convicted. So fundamentally, there's very little about this brief in front of the Supreme Court that holds water. Now, the Supreme Court has taken action on this morning. They have given Jack Smith's team 1 week to reply to the request for a stay. I'm going to tell you that I don't think Jack Smith's team is going to take that long. I'm not alone in that. Joyce Vance is already out there this morning saying it's not going to take him that long to reply to this. This is not a hard motion. And fundamentally, as soon as that brief is filed, that opposition brief is filed, the Supreme Court can decide whether or not they're going to grant the stay. And again, they need 5 justices to do it. I have been very vocal about this, and I am not alone in this, that I don't even think there's a chance the Supreme Court is going to take this case on an actual legitimate writ of certiorari petition for appeal. The likelihood that they're going to grant a stay here is even more slim, not just because they need another justice to agree to it, but also because they don't want to wade in on this one. I have to remind everybody, there's so many people running around the internet these days that are like, Supreme Court is corrupt. True. The Supreme Court has problems. True. Justice Thomas should be removed. True. But also, I have to remind everybody that the merits of immunity are this. In the event that the Supreme Court rules for Donald Trump on the issue of absolute presidential immunity, Joe Biden can literally start shooting people on the White House lawn and will never be criminally prosecuted for it. He could do all sorts of crazy things. He could round Trump up and throw him in a gulag for life. Never be prosecuted. So the Supreme Court is not going to go there because apart from anything else, what it does is it undercuts the authority of the Supreme Court to ever adjudicate anything having to do with presidential authority. And we're in a place where, the outcome of this at the moment is not looking very good for Donald Trump. So my bet is that within a week, we're going to have a decision from the Supreme Court on the stay. And I'm just going to tell you, I don't think it's going to go for Trump. I'm not going to game it out by percentage, but I think the likelihood is extremely slim. I'm also just going to say, if I were a Supreme Court justice reading this brief, not only would I think that the brief was incredibly weak, but I would also find it kind of profoundly disrespectful. It really does not take into consideration the gravity of what's at stake here. And the arguments that are being made are inherently flawed. These are arguments that we have seen made over and over and over again by Trump's team that assert things like he was acting within the scope of his presidential authority when he tried to overthrow the U.S. government. He was acting within the scope of his presidential authority when he mobilized a riot inside the Capitol building. He was acting within his presidential authority when he mobilized slates of fraudulent electors to overthrow the rights of 80 million American voters. Come on. That's not how this is going to go. I do have to remind everybody that there's always a possibility of a temporary stay. Those of you who have been here for a long time have seen this occur in front of the Supreme Court, a temporary stay while a decision is issued, okay? But I don't think this one is a hard call. And I would frankly be shocked to even get a temporary stay here. So we will have to see what happens next on this front. But I just want you all to know that even in the event that the Supreme Court rules in favor of Donald Trump on the Colorado ballot initiatives, I literally do not think he stands a snowball's chance in hell of getting absolute presidential immunity as requested from the Supreme Court. I think that the chance of this is like less than 0.1%. Okay, so stay aware, stay cautious. But of course, keep in mind that there are larger pictures at issue here, larger stakes than just what's happening with Donald Trump. And that is in part because of what it would mean, not for Donald Trump as the former president of the United States, but for the entire office of the U.S. presidency. That is what this case is really about. Because if you grant absolute immunity to one president or former president, you grant it to all. And that ends our system of democracy. It also ends the authority of the Supreme Court, which, by the way, at least as far as, review of potential crimes or other activity by a U.S. president. And that is just not the way that this is going to go. All right. I want to talk for a minute about what's going on with Fani Willis in Georgia, because there were some questions on the Patreon feed this morning. Reminder, if you want to ask questions in advance of the broadcast, You can become a subscriber at patreon.com/resistance live for as little as $2 a month. And you can ask me questions for 2 hours in advance of every broadcast. And if I haven't covered it many, many times before, or it's relevant, or it's not totally out of left field, or it's not something that you can Google, even then sometimes I'll answer it. I will answer your question on the air. I have to filter these days because usually there's like 150 questions on there some mornings, but I do my best to answer most of them on the air. All right, so one of the questions this morning was about what's going on with Fani Willis, because it turns out that there's sort of a weird, there's a weird conundrum under Georgia ethics law that's in play. And there was an editorial written about this in the New York Times back on January 24th by a very well-reputed Georgia law professor about how this all plays out if Fani Willis is removed. So I went and did a little bit of legal research on this morning because I wanted to give you guys like the most up-to-date version of how this takes place. All right. And there really is honestly some confusion on the Patreon feed and elsewhere about how this will all take place. Okay, here's what we're not going to do today. We're not going to bash or shame Fani Willis for having an adult relationship with a coworker. That we are not going to do. We've already been through that on this feed. I'm not going to entertain those questions. Where we are right now is about whether or not there is some potential financial benefit that emerges from this. And the answer to that is no. Okay, I want everybody to be really clear on this. The relationship did not start until after Nathan Wade was hired. He is being paid the same as every other special prosecutor. He has a long history of prosecuting felonies, including felony murder cases. This is not a situation where there is a financial benefit that has accrued to either Nathan Wade or Fani Willis as a result of their private adult romantic relationship. All right. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to kind of say that Fani Willis did anything wrong because she didn't. But I want people to understand the procedure of what happens here in the event that for a very unlikely outcome, she is removed by Judge McAfee. All right. There's a very strange thing under Georgia ethics law, which says that if a district attorney is removed, the entire staff of the district attorney's office is removed as well. This does not mean, this is where a lot of the confusion falls. This does not mean that all prosecutions are suddenly wiped clean. Okay. It does not mean that Trump gets off scot-free. That's not how it works. In fact, if Fani Willis is removed and the staff is removed from this case, there is a referral made to a prosecutorial assigning body in Georgia that will assign a new prosecutor to try the case. Now, is this ideal? Not really, because it could mean that if another prosecutor is assigned, that prosecutor could be like, yeah, I don't really think there's very much to go on here. Or I'm going to kind of dismiss charges against some of these co-conspirators. Or I'm going to investigate myself for a year and then figure out whether or not I want to continue. Not ideal. And there's a historic precedent for this where like a new prosecutor was appointed when a DA was removed and it took 2 years of investigation and then the new appointed prosecutor dropped the case. So it's not like they start over entirely. I want everybody to be really clear about this. It's not like the case starts over from scratch, but it does assign to a new prosecutor the same degree of prosecutorial authority that Fani Willis has. Now, I want to assure everybody, I do not think it is going in that direction. There is literally no evidence here of any financial benefit such that removing Fani Willis from this case, or Nathan Wade for that matter, makes any sense. And so we're going to have a hearing on Thursday and Friday. It's going to be very salacious. It's going to be very gossipy. You know, already I'm just going to point this out. Fani Willis's own attorney has said this is based on gossip and rank speculation. There's no proof. There's no evidence. There's nothing here to suggest that any aspect of Trump's prosecution has been compromised. This is a delay and defense tactic from one of the co-defendants of Donald Trump to try to get the case stopped. That's essentially what's going on. And so we're going to have to see what happens next. Now, the reason why everybody's tossing around this idea of a leave of absence, okay, is that if Fani Willis takes a leave of absence, then she can't technically be removed as the DA. All right. So some people are out there saying she should take a leave of absence just to save the case. Now, I'm just going to point something out here, because I frankly find all of this like discussion very laced with white supremacist patriarchy and misogynoir. And I think the idea that there are calls afoot, largely from men and white male commentators in particular, that Fani Willis should take a leave of absence for having an adult consensual relationship with a coworker where there is no financial misconduct, where literally no aspect of this case has been compromised, is a bit rich. I do think that there are strategic considerations here that might lead her to that conclusion. But do I think that it is appropriate for white male legal commentators to be calling for, a black woman prosecutor who has pursued Donald Trump to step aside from this prosecution because she engaged in a romantic relationship with a coworker? No, I do not. And I actually think that we need to be talking more about the fact that there is an incredible tolerance of white male attorney misconduct and a lot of grace given for this kind of behavior, including behavior that actually involves power dynamics and sexual harassment in the workplace and all sorts of other things that are not on the table here. Okay. So I think that this is a very fraught circumstance. And I'm going to tell you all that I think Fani Willis has done nothing wrong. There is no evidence that she has done anything wrong. And the idea that this incredibly accomplished female black prosecutor should step aside because she fell in love with a coworker, is stupid. It's stupid. And I think, honestly, our messaging on our side of the fence about this has been piss poor. Frankly, we should be out there saying she did nothing wrong. Why is everybody calling for her to step aside? Dumb. It's dumb. All we're doing is giving credence to the idea that she's engaged in some form of misconduct. So in any event, we're going to have a hearing in front of Judge McAfee on Thursday and Friday. It's going to be an evidentiary hearing. There's going to be testimony taken about when the relationship started and whether or not there was any financial wrongdoing. And Judge McAfee is going to consider the evidence, and then he's going to rule. And if Fani Willis decides between now and Thursday that she's going to take a brief leave of absence while Trump is prosecuted because she doesn't want to take the risk, fine. But I don't think anybody on our side of the fence should be walking around claiming that Fani Willis had bad judgment or that Fani Willis did anything wrong, because she didn't. And, the idea that we hold black women to standards that don't apply to anybody else continues to be revolting, just revolting. So I have to say it from that perspective because that's the lens through which I see it. I say that as somebody who practiced in federal court for 15 years and saw the most insane misconduct from white male lawyers that you could possibly imagine. Cocaine before depositions, showing up drunk for court at 9 a.m., allowing people who were having overt affairs with junior associates, 30 years their junior, with a wife and kids at home, assigning unqualified junior attorneys to roles that they were not ready to take on. As somebody who saw all of that stuff and, saw male prosecutors allowed to continue doing it, saw male attorneys allowed to run cases, and we're not talking small cases, we're talking $100 million class action cases, notwithstanding the obvious misconduct that they were engaged in. I have no time for any allegation that Fani Willis engaged in poor judgment, because she didn't. The only thing that she's guilty of is having a consensual adult relationship with someone she works with. So I simply want everybody to kind of see this through the lens through which it is being presented. And we don't know what the outcome is going to be yet, but let's make no mistake that the far right is asking us to carry water for them on this one in order to save Donald Trump from prosecution in Georgia. And we should decline that invitation, full stop. All right, that's the end of my rant for today. I want to talk about what's going on with Jack Smith in Florida, because, again, there's a lot of misinformation and confusion about what's happening in this review of classified documents in Florida, okay? People are on the feed this morning saying he chose not to appeal it. False. What Jack Smith has done in relation to Judge Cannon's order that he turn over classified documents to the defense and that he file publicly on the record documents that reveal witnesses is he has filed what's called a motion for reconsideration. That is a preliminary step before appealing to the 11th Circuit. And the motion for reconsideration is essentially pleading with Judge Cannon to not put these witnesses or classified material into the public domain. He will lose on that because we all know what Judge Cannon is going to do. And when he loses, then he will file an appeal to the 11th Circuit. And he will have every reasonable basis to do it. All right. So he's basically setting up the dominoes to make sure that he can appeal. And I want to make very clear to everyone here that this story is not over. Jack Smith has very clearly reached a breaking point with these rulings. Yesterday, the hearings that were held, you can go back and watch yesterday's broadcast, but they were held in a SCIF, which is a secured classified information facility that allows for classified material to be reviewed without phones, without technology. You're not allowed to carry anything in or out. Nobody's allowed to take photocopies or anything else like that. And they were reviewed separately with Trump not reviewing documents, but the argument was conducted separately because it implicated classified documents. Trump's team went first. Jack Smith's team went second. Everything was conducted in the SCIF. There's nothing improper about that. All right. So please understand that it is not like Jack Smith has dropped the ball. He is simply knocking down every procedural impediment to appealing to the 11th Circuit before he does so, at which point there will be no possible way for the 11th Circuit to not look at this and go, as they have, by the way, before, what the heck are you doing, Judge Cannon? That's what we want. We want an airtight appellate case on the issue, particularly of disclosing these witnesses, because their lives are at stake. Like, there's actually, been documents turned over now to the defense in this case concerning dozens of threats to a single witness. So I don't think that there is going to be a problem in the appeal to the 11th Circuit on this issue. And by the way, I'm just going to say that this overlaps with what happened in the New York civil fraud case. It overlaps with what has happened in Judge Chutkin's courtroom. The reason why we have gag orders is because of concerns about threats to prosecutors and witnesses and judges and their staff and jurors and everything else. This is not a hard case. Not a hard case. And Eileen Cannon is an ideologue, as we've discussed here like hundreds of times before. Okay. All right. We have talked about the foreign aid bill because, as many of you know, this morning, the Senate passed a foreign aid bill that included $10 billion in humanitarian aid to Gaza. It includes additional enormous aid package to Ukraine, both of which are desperately needed. And then it also includes $14 billion in aid to Israel. I'm just going to point out to everyone who this morning is like, why can't we stop funding to Israel based on the genocide that's happening in Gaza, that there is a good news, bad news situation about what's happening right now. First of all, the foreign aid bill is not going to pass the House. Mike Johnson has already said that it's DOA in the House of Representatives. This is very problematic. Like, I have to point this out to people, and we discussed yesterday what's happening in Rafah. You all know my perspective on what's happening in the context of what's happening in Gaza generally. One of the things I'm going to say here, though, is that we need that humanitarian aid. Gaza needs humanitarian aid, and Ukraine is in desperate, dire need of funding. If you think, by the way, that Donald Trump's comments that he's going to let Russia do whatever they want and they can bombard over Ukraine and straight into Poland and other countries in Europe, that he will invite Putin to do whatever he wants. If you think that's not linked to the House of Representatives GOP position on not approving this bill that provides additional aid to Ukraine, I've got a Brooklyn Bridge to sell you. So one of the things that I want people to understand here is that, yes, I'm with you. I don't think we should be providing any further aid to Israel. And simultaneously, right now, what is bound up in this package is humanitarian aid to Gaza and funding to Ukraine. It's really problematic. It's really problematic because I, for one, would really like to see $10 billion in humanitarian aid going into Gaza. I would also like to see additional funding going to Ukraine. And yet what has happened in the Senate is this has all got tied up with additional funding for Israel. It's very problematic. And frankly, I think one of the things that's the most difficult about it is that we are still seeing the House GOP carrying water for Donald Trump because he doesn't want Ukraine to get funding. That's really what's going on here. In some fundamental way, what the GOP is doing has very little to do with Gaza's desperate need for humanitarian aid and everything to do with not wanting to give Ukraine additional money because they want Putin to win. So it's a very complicated situation. But for everybody who's like, why can't we stop, aid to Israel coming out of the Congress? Well, the bad news, or good news, is that it's dead anyway, thanks to the Republicans. All right. And I am not happy with the way in which this has all been packaged or gone down. But that's the deal. That's the deal. And it's not all right. I mean, we really do desperately need humanitarian aid for Gaza, and we desperately need additional funding for Ukraine. And the fact that this is going to die is thanks to Trump and Putin. And it would be really nice if Israel was carved out of it, but it's not. So that's where it is. And yes, Putin is gearing up to kind of mow down Europe. If you missed Rachel Maddow's A block last night, oh my goodness, do I strongly encourage you to go find it today, because she did an entire historical narrative about the propaganda that Putin was spewing about Poland being responsible for being invaded by Hitler in his interview with Tucker Carlson, which, by the way, is setting up the narrative that Poland deserves to be invaded now. So there's a lot of reason to be very, very concerned about the lay of the land in relation to this particular bill. It's very, very, very concerning. I mean, the good news now is that there is a lot of mainstream media coverage this morning, and there was a lot more yesterday afternoon and evening about the way in which this interview with Tucker Carlson is truly setting up World War III. And all the alarm bells should be going off for everyone who's looking at this, right? There is no false equivalency. And I'm not going to talk about Jon Stewart because I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot of like absolute garbage out of the beginning broadcast last night. I just have to say this. There is no equivalency between Biden and Putin. The fact that Biden mumbles occasionally because he has a stutter, occasionally mixes up the names of countries because like, who doesn't when you're like under that much pressure and the press is screaming at you at the top of your lungs, and someone who is literally like, let Putin invade Europe and let's start World War III because I don't believe in NATO, right? Like that's humane. I want to build concentration camps at the US border and round up every single Latino in America and stick them in a concentration camp or deport them. Joe Biden isn't doing that, right? So we need to have a much broader conversation about the context of what is taking place here. Because if you are not able to actually reach the nuance of it, you're going to miss the bigger picture, right? This is a situation where we've got to be really clear on exactly what Trump and Putin are after, because they're in total alignment. And so, by the way, is Mike Johnson and the House GOP. So we've got to get really clear on this, like really, really clear on this. There is no equivalency between Biden and Trump. None. You have a choice between like a possible future for America and the rest of the planet and like Vladimir Putin taking over all of Europe, World War III, which by the way, killed like, 500,000 American soldiers. And, the prospect of the end of democracy as we know it worldwide. And that's leaving aside things like climate change and the end of abortion and like the rounding up and murder of trans people and, the rounding up and deportation and concentration camps for Black and brown people and political dissidents and people who are working for a free press and people like me. Like, that's your choice. That's your choice. I mean, this is like a no-brainer. So, that's kind of where I am right now. I think that with regard to the foreign aid bill, you got to understand the context and the nuance of what's going on. I have grave concerns about it in the way that it stands, and it is an incredibly complex situation at the moment. All right. As I said at the top of the broadcast, today is the special election for George Santos's seat. There is still text banking and phone banking going on into that district until the polls close tonight. Yes, I know it is snowing in New York. If you live in the New York 3rd, please do not neglect to vote. I also want to remind everybody that for all of us who are in the Super Tuesday pile of states, if you are in a state that allows for early voting, you should go look up your early voting deadlines right now. If you're in a state that does mail-in voting, hello, California, your ballot should be in your mailbox. Okay. So it's time to really get moving on this. Okay. We are now, Super Tuesday is March 5th. We're like 2 scant weeks away from it. Well, like 3, but point being, we're very close, and you should engage in your assurances that your vote is going to be counted, and you should start that now. All right. So that's it. One thing I want to mention here today, I am considering adding a second daily broadcast here. I'm a little bound up about it because I'm not sure this is going to happen, but I'm really interested to hear from all of you in the comments about whether or not you would be interested in a second broadcast that was not Q&A, but that was more of like a daily rant. And I don't think we're going to call it that, but I think that I'm debating whether or not to do something that is kind of like a daily, 8 to 10 minute rant on a given daily issue that goes up live on the YouTube channel, every afternoon. I'm thinking about it. It would also be run in conjunction with our Substack because I would put it up in written form on my Substack while it was there. I'm kind of thinking about it. It feels like it might be the window of time to do something like this. So if you're game for that, drop me a comment on this YouTube video. Let me know your thoughts about it. It's again, going to be a heavy lift, and I'm going to be reliant on the folks who are subscribers over on Patreon to help me with my back end team who runs all the technology on this and does video and sound editing and everything else for our videos that are not live. So, if you get benefit out of this broadcast and you have not yet done so, please head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. It's like NPR. You can donate for like $2 a month, all the way up to $100, and get perks and like extra goodies and ask questions and everything else. And $2 a month is less than a dime a broadcast. And if we add a second broadcast, it's going to be less than a nickel. So come on, folks. If you're not in over there already, I would ask you to go check it out. All right. If you have not yet liked this broadcast, please hit the thumbs up. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, hit that subscribe button and the bell notification so you never miss it if I go live. And I'm going to think about this. I'm just going to think about it. I'm having a moment where I think it might not be such a bad idea, let alone in an election year, to spend some time every day giving you guys my my hot takes. Okay. I will catch you all here tomorrow, regular time. I'm going to remind everybody I am not here Friday because I'm going to the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, where the film on which I am an impact producer, it's called Running for the Mountains, and it's about Joe Manchin and political corruption and evil doing in West Virginia and the decimation of West Virginia's people and its environment. It is premiering at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival later on this week. So I will not be here on Friday morning, but I will be here tomorrow and Thursday morning, and I will be back for all of our Patreon subscribers for Progressive Coffee Hour on Sunday. All right. Much love, everybody. I will see you all here tomorrow, regular time. And yeah, let me all know what you think about my idea. All right. I'll see you tomorrow. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.